Begin. Carol Muske-Dukes is the author of 9 books of poetry, or is it 10 now? 9. 4 novels, 2 books of essays, and 2 children's poetry handbooks. Her essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, the LA Times, where she was the poetry columnist for some years, the Huffington Post, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and many other journals and newspapers. She has been the recipient of numerous fellowships and honors, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, an NEA grant, a Library of Congress Award, the Alice Faye D. Castagnola Award from the Poetry Society of America, and an Ingram Merrill Award. She recently completed her term as the Poet Laureate of the state of California, and Carol is the founder of the PhD program in creative writing and literature at the University of Southern California, where she is professor of English. Carol Muske-Dukes' superlative new book of poems, Blue Rose, is profoundly retrospective, a long, deep gaze over the landscape of the poet's life. The book's first 2 poems, about the birth of the poet's daughter Annie and the death of her mother Elsie, plunge us into the great mysteries, life and death, giving us an immediate sense of the poet's ambitions. There follow, among others, poems about a visit to a women's clinic in Kashmir, a really remarkable piece about the challenges of practicing medicine in a misogynist culture, about an abortion that occurred in the year of the passage of Roe versus Wade, about the poet's performance in the Paris staging of the iconic 60s musical Hair, at a time when feminism was just coming to the fore, about a reading to the gray plebe sea of cadets at West Point, and about the poet's writing workshops, which it went on for a decade with female prisoners in the Women's House of Detention on Rikers Island in New York City. In these poems, Carol explores with unsparing honesty what it meant and means to be a woman in the last half century, to live out one's life in a woman's body in a culture slowly coming to terms with both feminism and institutionalized misogyny. This is a book that, as I've said, is retrospective, but also one that's introspective, looking in, offering intimate portraits of those who shaped and inspired the poet's inner life. Among these artists and visionaries are the modernist Paula Modersohn Becker, the first woman painter to depict the female figure naked, the poet Adrienne Rich, who walks up a perilously icy hill with the poet with the same fearlessness, anger, and impatient struggle forward that marks Adrienne's poetry and life, and the late 19th and early 20th century poet Ina Coolbrith, who fled a Mormon polygamous father to settle in California and become that state's first poet laureate and also the first poet laureate in our country. And others, many other examples. All women whose big-scale thinking, married to grit and pluck, make them guides to the poet who, as a very young woman, steps out on that stage in Paris naked, her bright fake tryout at life, and grows from that tentativeness and shame into the poet we have come to know through a life's worth of books in which Carol's life and passions and politics are explored with incredible intelligence and formal prowess, and yes, a righteous anger, which pulses through Blue Rose, especially in poems about gun violence and reproductive rights and the desperate realities of climate change. So the breadth and complexity of subject and theme in this book, coupled with Carol's dazzling technical virtuosity, which is made of equal parts of compressed syntax and succulent music, all this might seem like ambition enough for most poets. But there's more. There's the Blue Rose, the title of the book and its opening poem, in which that image evokes the poet's daughter Annie, her newborn body momentarily blue from lack of oxygen. Images of blueness thread throughout the collection. Blue, the color of the romantic artists and mystics, of the nocturnal, the transcendent, of the alien and ineffable. In a later poem in the book, we again see the poet's daughter, Annie, already showing her scientist bent, dyeing a white rose blue in the family kitchen. In the book's final poem, Annie, now a research scientist, looks through an electron microscope at coal, fly welter, airborne dust, ancient pine cones, and a rose petal. The landscape of that petal, and here it is, guys, worth buying the book just for this incredible photograph. The landscape of that's a rose petal magnified thousands of times, serves as the frontispiece of the book, a strangely haunted landscape which represents the imagination, the invisible, mysterious power that has the ability to deepen and transform the everyday world of the body and suffering, of political realities and hard-won change. The gesture toward blueness, toward the power and mystery of the imagination itself, is a nervy one, taken on only by the best poets among us, and we are indeed lucky to have one of those poets here to read for us today. So let's welcome Carol Muske-Dukes.
Of course, I should just say good night, because after that introduction, I can't imagine living up to it. But thank you, Claire. And I wanted to thank the Department of English, Trinity College, Ethan, and Claire and Joe, everyone who brought me here. I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you all for coming. I hope somebody can keep track of time. Maybe you can make like a quacking sound or something if I go over.
I don't have a watch.
Okay, quack. It's like, Groucho Marx or something. Did he have like a duck that would come down and quack or something? How long am I supposed to read? Like maybe?
About 25 minutes.
25 minutes, all right. All right, so, you can get the hook when if I go too long. I have, it's interesting. I was going to read a number of the poems that Claire mentioned so eloquently. I obviously can't read them all, lucky for you. But I thought I would start actually with a poem. A poem from an earlier book of mine called Sparrow. And it contains a number of elegies to my late husband, who was a wonderful actor, who died suddenly in 2000 of a heart attack. And I did the extraordinary thing. He was on Broadway a lot and in film and TV and stuff, but I did the rather strange ritualistic thing of sprinkling his ashes. Well, that part of it wasn't so unusual. God, I'm really copying my piece. I, put ashes where one would expect them, in places that he loved and admired, but also Broadway. The Broadway stage struck me as a place where it might be really significant for ashes to be scattered. I know it sounds strange, but he had been on, most recently on stage, I think it was the Court Theater on Broadway, in a play by Arthur Miller called Broken Glass. And anyway, long story short, another actor friend, a wonderful actor you would also know, and I went to this theater, and during the day, when actors were rehearsing, they took their lunch break, and the director let us come in and actually scatter ashes in the, on the stage and in the front row, and where he might have walked in other places. There's a reference to backstage, which is completely dark, of course, before the actors walk out, but there's usually like a yellow phosphorescent line they can follow in the darkness before they walk out into the bright spotlights. This poem it's sort of been taken up by a National Endowment for the Arts project called Poetry Out Loud or something like that, where children learn to recite poetry aloud, and there's a contest and an award and so on. And for some reason this poem has been taken up, which seems to me like a very, forbidding poem for a child to recite, but in fact I've heard some of the recitations and they're better than I've ever done this poem. So with that introduction, I'll read this poem called Ovation. I try to make myself afraid, the way you must have been afraid, stepping out onto this stage, but with a fear so pure, so perfectly informed that you strode out shouting, Here where the neon yellow arrows painted on the floor shoot forward forward underfoot in blackness beneath the hanging sequence of tinted skies, out toward that mindless, immortalizing light now dark. Now I think I feel the heat you must have felt rising from the front rows. A gaping fire door, a furnace. Your single body standing here with no shadow, swinging on itself. Had you been a fool, you might have thought that they loved you. They never love you, you said. They're hungry for the god in his gold eclipse, the pure you on fire. John and I move quickly, each with a handful of ash scattering, the sound of no sound falling into the cracks in the boards, the footlights, the first row, a small personal snow, a prince of dust, a villain of dust. Each part you played, drifting up again, recomposing. I open my hand, I let you go, back into the lines you learned, back into the body and the body's beauty, back into the standing ovation, bow after bow after bow. So that book, Sparrow, was published in 2003, a while ago, so now we're jumping ahead to Blue Rose, which is, again, Claire so kindly mentioned, my latest and 9th book of poems. The title poem she also mentioned is Blue Rose, dedicated to, well, not dedicated, but inspired by my daughter, who was not necessarily a blue baby, but sometimes when babies are born and there's been a delay in getting to the hospital, which was true in my case, because she came so quickly, there is a little bit of lack of oxygen. It can be problematic, but she just looked sort of a beautiful blue, actually, and was quickly revised. And then there was also the reference, later reference in this book, too. There is the other reference to her dying, a white rose from our garden blue, as a experiment, a scientific experiment when she was about 8 years old. Always interested in science. Blue Rose. She came too fast. Couldn't slow my body's unstoppable intent till the EMTs shouted how. I flashed on the driver's fast calculating eyes in the dash mirror as he amped the siren overhead. Later, lashed to a pallet, I glimpsed the sky, a dawn moon intact before the rapid hands of a hospital clock. In the labor room, she crowned, then turned, withdrawing from this world as if she had glimpsed its fixed, monolithic white. Entering light, she was danger blue. Yet to me her color appeared something never imagined, if flower of myth. Bloom on the Isle of the Colorblind, far from our spectrum. Red to magenta to a breath of cyan, so there were just her eyelids bruised as new petals, just her brains opening rose. The morning sky turning a color never before seen. And this is, again, mentioned by Claire, a poem from my mother, who died at age 99 in 2015. It's a ghazal, or a ghazal. It's a poetic form. How many students are poetry students here? I see you're so tentative about it. It's okay, you should be doing this. I'm a poet, right? This is a form you might be familiar with. It's made up of couplets. I won't go into the details of it, but basically each couplet or two lines, stanza, ends with the same word and then flips to, well, actually, it should be the same word throughout the ghazal. I used to live and die as the two end words throughout, the alternating end words, and it's for my mother, Elsie Kuchera Muske, and her dates are 1916 to 2015. The door of the hospice room in which you die stays open. Dreaming you drift there, dying in that floating bed of fierce arguments that live on until the moment when you no longer live. Cheered on by a chorus of voices as you die, go now, go to the light. Still, don't die, cries a dissenting voice within, a flickering live wire beneath the nightlight's angel face. Live news at 7 a.m. after the great orange moon dies. Sunlight, fingers a blue bowl of shaved ice. Die? No, not now. A tiny version of you pops out alive from a burning wood, swims upstream, panting. Lively as Nurse Good's soft shoe entrance to applause, dying. She smiles, squints at her syringe, held up lit like dye, bubbles lengthening in a radiant corridor. See lives unborn, half souls blindly pushing toward life. Gather outside time, inside your mind. Move, die, they cry. You won't acquiesce, mother. I cannot die for you. I don't know how. You brought me here alive. You taught me everything, but how to let you die. I grew up in St. Paul. I was born and grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. And both Claire and Joe Byrne, her husband, are from Minnesota as well, from St. Paul, right? And Joe and I remember an orphanage that happened to have been sort of kitty corner across the street, open meadow fields, and then this very Dickens-looking orphanage, which contains many children and run by nuns, was situated. And I remember it as it's remembered in this poem. I'd like to dedicate it to Joe. Orphanage. Awake suddenly and afraid, I looked down from my high window into the spinning prism of snow, past the new flattened macadam to the white meadow below. I watched the drifts cover the tall grass wherein summer rabbits and whippoorwills hid from eager slingshots in family-sized plots following the surveyors, black flags. I'd been awakened by a sound, something stuck, spinning its wheels, a truck. I could see now as it lunged suddenly out of the deep rut it had made, trying to downshift at the top of the meadow path leading to the orphanage below. As the truck lurched free, I could see its tailgate shudder, gape, then a quick cascade of tumbling shapes, taillights, bright red blurs vanishing. Moonlit, my school coat and scarf drawn on, I went spinning down through the sleeping house, feeling its familiar steady rebuke. Slipping out, ghostly in blowing snow, I found them where they'd fallen, dolls, a scattered family, lying face up, eyes staring past me at the sky as their silly faces were slowly erased, Kewpie pouts, clumsy spit curls, Raggedy Ann dresses, cheaply made, as if a collection taken at the new church nearby had paid a doll factory to spin off a poor version of something lovable. Special delivery, though now I heard a chime. It must have been Christmas. It must have been hours before the nuns led their small charges out to salt the ice and shovel the hill where others sledded. They honored the earth. I watched how their gardens grew, lush in summer, all the way to the iron gates. I thought how soon they would be gone, along with the living meadow. So why have I kept close for years this dream of them, coming upon the tossed dolls, face after unloved face, in the bright new morning, holding them tight all the way home, though there was no home, of course, I knew there never was one. And this is a poem called No Hands. I mentioned my husband, late husband, was an actor, and he was not a showy person in personal life, but he had that actor's habit of often dramatizing ordinary situations. And this was a very scary situation that he should not have dramatized, but I wrote this poem about it being a nasty poet. Anyway, no hands. He rode no hands, speeding headlong down the hill near our house, his arms extended, held rigid away from his body, our small daughter behind him on the bike, in her yellow sunsuit, bareheaded. She held on to him for her life. I watched them from above, helpless, a failed brake. Far below us, a stop sign rose like a child's toy shield. He could not stop. He would not. That hunger for display overrode danger, illusions of safety. Even death had less to do with it than the will's eventual triumph over stasis. How he'd finally fly free, and how she might accompany him. As an audience travels with a performer, an object of regard, downward, fast, so what cannot stop holds on to a mind flying away from itself, seeking release from the soul, speeding away, yet staying close his breath, even at this distance. Claire also mentioned that I was in, I don't know, how many of you ever heard of the rock musical Hair? Nobody? Well, okay, a few other talented hands. Hair was a huge hit. It actually became a movie as well, if you know about it. A huge hit in the late 60s in New York, and then went around the world. I happened to have been in Paris. I had just finished some graduate school, and I was in Paris as a student, and I somehow managed to end up auditioning for Hair. I had no talent. Well, I didn't have any acting talent, let me put it that way. I didn't have any talent for acting. I didn't have any talent for dancing on stage or moving, but I could sing a little. So I was wandering around Paris, and I saw this little sign that said Audition outside Théâtre Pointe-Saint-Martin, and I walked in, and someone handed me a number. And I thought, oh, this is like the bakery. I'll just wait and see what happens. And suddenly they called my number, and I went up on stage. I knew all the songs from Hair because I loved Hair, like everybody did. This was like 1970, 1971. And I knew, as everyone did, all the songs by heart. Have you ever heard of Easy to Be Hard or any of those songs? Some of you, there's a glimmer of response. Actually, it's worth checking out these songs. They're fascinating. They recur. They keep coming back because they have a kind of important message. The musical itself was in response to was written in response to the Vietnam War, and was good part of the musical was a protest against the war. And the nude scene that Claire kindly mentioned, that I did not take part in, took place right at the end of the first act. After there's a sort of depiction of a Vietnamese massacre, and then the idea was, that we were stripped to nothing, and then the actors would, take off their clothes and stand before the audience naked. This is in Paris, where they would go, oh my God. But I never did it because I felt so awkward. But then one night before, we would all sort of talk before the show started, and I stayed in the background. I was meant to be a member of the chorus or understudy Christy, who sang Frank Mills, another song from here. And I decided that night, because we had a great talk in French, and I thought my French was really improving. And I was under the illusion that my French was really good. So I thought, I'm totally into this. I can take my clothes off tonight. So I did. For the nude scene, and then of course the other actors hid my clothes during the intermission. I mean, that was the end of the first act, and so I had to go around begging them to give me my clothes back. That was an illusion, a delusion of mine, that I really understood what was going on. Anyway, this is called Audition, Paris, Hair, 1971. Once through an ancient stage door, past a sign, Audition, I'm ushered by hip Mercury, cocked torch lighting his winged brow. My number's the one he hands me, though I don't know how to act or if I can belt Easy to Be Hard, which I do. How can people be so heartless? It goes, how can people be so heartless? Blah, blah. I asked the high notes. The day before I quoted de Beauvoir with equal fire as a metro creep touched my leg, crooning, flat. I shouted back my textbook, va-t'en, which he instantly corrected. He was right, unfortunately. My air, wrong person familiar. It should have been allez-vous-en or something. Anyway, now an anonymous voice rises from a dark row asking for one more number. Later a callback at my Cité U dorm. Suddenly on stage, piping high notes at a Hell's Angel, missing back of chorus cues half rehearsed. The first bars of Aquarius chime, and I climb hand over hand from scaffolding below the side balconies into scripted light. But the tribe didn't take to me. The only time I took my clothes off at the nude scene, Act One's end, they hid my tie-dyed jeans. I couldn't be naked the way they were. I think everything is real. Nude all interlude, I searched behind the great moth-eaten sway of cloth behind or beneath hanging skies, in my forever auditioning blonde body, begging in each failed language my clothes. Pourquoi, mes amis? Funny joke, but these bright fake tryouts at life ongoing take a toll. Due to be paid up Mercury's road. Everything was real to me, even the ongoing joke war over a woman's body. What I shout back exiting is how I believe it will all come down in a future where she, great moon, rises up, floods the 7th house, and Jupiter aligns peacefully at last with his partner, Mars. And I'll just read this, again, Claire mentioned this, triptych poem, 3-part poem called Gun Control. And I'll just read the first part of the 3-part. Jeez, I gotta get this thing away from me. 1. When the older brother, horsing around, opened fire with the 12-gauge and shot his little brother in the back, my Aunt Anna pressed her open hand over the wound, over the blown right lung. Blood stuttered up through her fingers. As he began to slide away, she kept her hand flat hard against that death. At emergency, they had to pry it away. He survived that night. When he takes his shirt off today at the lake, you can see the bleached white stretch where no hair grows, and the skin thins to her imprint, a handspan just under his shoulder, where a wing, if we had wings, might begin to unfurl. It's a poem about a judge who happened to be my older brother, who's now retired, but he was a juvenile court judge for many years. And my mother and I visited his courtroom at one point. He and I are wide apart politically. I don't mind identifying myself as left or liberal, and he's very, very right. But I've come to think that he suffered in having to send kids away often. And as judge, he had to make terrible decisions about kids whose parents came and couldn't take care of their kids anymore. They'd gotten into trouble, or kids who had committed crimes and were actually headed for real, far worse trouble. And so this scene I'm going to describe was really about the terrible decisions he had. It is about the terrible decisions he had to make. Judge, once my big brother embodied justice, once a wild teen, indifferent cadet, reformed at last by the heavy weight of our father's hand. How it was done then. Maybe wise the eldest son, he chose law, then presided over a courtroom filled with the lost young. The day my mother and I visited, we sat in the back, watching his altered face, both attentive to testimony and turned away, as if listening to or seeing something unheard by the rest of us, unseen by the rest of us. Invisible codex on a white wall vanishing, how it is done then, now. The strain of it, unlike the sweet, swift pour of mercy. Human failure in its signs, character halfway doomed. Yet we are all only halfway saved. We watched her, the woman, appearing suddenly before him, her young son beside her, she crying out her life's worth of tears. The boy in a motorcycle jacket, a pirate flag boosting his pale, defeated swagger. 12, 13. I have no choice, she said. The boy suddenly loud, I'll change, I promise. Single mother, how many jobs, gangs have stolen from her? Someone gave her son a gun. He threatened a stranger, then threw it away. The judge, my brother, asks for an answer. The boy kneels before her. Don't do this. She turns away. Never had choice in her life. She chooses now. The judge rules. She looks away as guards escort him to his future. Maybe this future, today, where my brother retains his fundamentalist denial of what I, on the other side, find inalienable. The blind lady's scales tilt right, tilt left. In that far past, I watch the boy's mother exiting past my mother and me, her face a mask of agony and grief. I see reflected suddenly on the judge's face as he gavels away the court's murmuring. I don't know when he turned forever from the radiant code, but the cases kept coming, standing before him. Okay. I went to see, I have an interest in science. My daughter has become a scientist, as Claire also mentioned. She's got her advanced degree in molecular biology and decided to become a research scientist, and she has her own lab and does very interesting work. I have my own interest in science. I wrote, one of my novels has a woman who's a scientist who's the protagonist. But in any case, I was invited to sit in at the USC, where I teach, the USC Medical School, where a colleague, one of the professors there, I think microbiology, invited me to come and see a seminar, or a class they were having about zebrafish. Now, zebrafish are amazing because they're used in science a great deal. They're able to regenerate at an extraordinary capacity. For example, they'll grow back parts of their body. They'll even grow back a heart or a brain. It's the reason why they're used so much in genetic research. So I was able to witness the zebrafish on a screen, and one of their graduate students describing her work. There's reference here to a twist, which is an actual name of a gene, twist 1, a reference to, I guess you'll get everything else. Oh, the particular disease that the zebrafish were able to actually cure, in a sense, in quotes, that I realized that day, or I was told, was a kind of birth defect. Children born with this birth defect have skulls that are not completed. So they have open areas of the skull. And so what they were doing with these zebrafish was, altering their skulls, and then the skulls would grow back. So they were using some of what they learned in this by this procedure to apply to these children who were born this way. Seminar zebrafish. In the dark, the screen lights up like an aquarium. The fish move dreamily, their skulls gaping in places, traced in neon green and violet dye. A young woman stands, waves an infrared wand, outlining mutations she's made, making these unfused brain caps by scissoring a gene named Twist 1. And here it is, an altered future, showing up in the see-through embryo sac. So something made wrong with these fish will make something right, like heal the crania of human children born this way. Look, our species can't regenerate itself or refuse as zebrafish can. We sicken, die, blame gods of luck or fate. But this silver and blue striped female, this gold and blue striped male, they know how to grow back a heart. They started beating again, just as they can rebirth a brain. The mutants swim before our eyes, their lethal-looking wounds unwinding from super genes, spliced. For the rest of us, death's still the same. Coffee tastes as bitter today as tomorrow, and screen light swims across our eyes, glimpsing images of dizzying prediction, turning real. Who and what can be saved? Maybe we're not meant for extinction. From real bad coffee, late seminars, to the young woman with a wand, her gold, silver, and blue shape, shifting fish. There's a faint glow of hope from the genome. The screen pales, darkens. Now it's time for the follow-up, time for further Q&A. I hope not everyone's getting sick. It sounds like a terrible bronchitis has infected this audience. I'm going to finish with that poem that Claire also mentioned before my daughter, but first I'm going to read a new poem, sort of we're up to everything here with this new poem, which will be in the New Yorker soon. It's called Daphne After. How many of you know anything about the myth of Daphne? Who she was? Anybody? I know you do, Claire. In most, I assume you're professors, but Daphne was a character in myth who was a figure who was pursued, a woman figure who was pursued by the god Zeus, who was very lusty, and or I'm sorry, she was being pursued by Apollo, forgive me, the god of the sun, but also a god who created great trouble for everyone. And to save her, Zeus turned her into a tree. She was running away from Apollo, who was going to rape her, and she was turned into a living plant, a tree. And it sounds funny, but it was actually, I guess on Zeus's part, an unusual moment of compassion. This is a poem about a high school friend of mine who translated Latin with me. I know Latin isn't taught anymore, and that's a great shame because there's much to be learned about language as we use it in reading and poetry itself. I'll wait till everybody's done coughing. This is called Daphne After. So spring blossomed in spite of itself. Uniform skirts uprolled high by wild girls curbside smoking. Still, two of us, heads together, translating. Ourselves as stoic teens thinking Marcus A. So month of rose pagodas of lilacs impetuous blue. Twigs spill from her dropped text as she flees translation class. The nun's query. He demanded her name first. Just steps from the bus stop, sunset, shade before ancient dark, blossoms beneath her, beneath the shock light of staggered street lamps coming on. Lita's Zeus, his suit and tie, swan's hiss in her ear. She told me only. The great wings of aloneness closed in us. We learned how the passive voice was magnified. The soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts, said Marcus Aurelius. Powerless to move, she became past tense of strength, once standing tall at her father's grave, his name in brass florets. But Latin, offhand, to seize or abduct, Ovid's shudder, vos mos non sit sponsa. Once we might have found it funny, you will not be a bride, you will be a tree. At each ring where her flesh became bark, a path opened, root split. Some believe that anger can take the place of love. She found the verb for it, having to do with the forest and a young girl running fast, calling out, then silence, becoming as she had one of them, reaching skyward, their witness, bowing. Those wings hidden in the tree, meaning she was not ready to be cut down, not ready to be chopped into little sticks and tossed into fire's assumed supremacy. All that smoke, but her ashes refusing to fly. And finally, I will read, I think I'm sort of on time. Oh, great. It's good to hear that you're perfect in that way, if only time-wise. This is called Microscope, and again, as Claire mentioned, my daughter, her wonderful photograph, and it's an EMT, I think it's called electronic, anyway, it's an electronic transmission microscope, magnifies at a subatomic level images, and so she was able to take a rose petal, and that image is in the front that she spattered with some kind of substance, and it made it more visible. It's incredible intricacies, and this is about her and her that microscope, as well about women as scientists. As you know, more women are going, thank God, are going into science. More women are involved with STEM, and my daughter is one of them. There's also a reference to Rosalind Franklin. Does anyone here know who she was? Rosalind Franklin? She was, I'm going to say, just come out and say it, she was a discoverer of DNA. You don't hear her name. Whose name do you hear about DNA? Crick and Watson? You hear about the two men who are mostly associated, or are absolutely associated with the discovery of DNA, But the fact of the matter is, Rosalind Franklin was a colleague of theirs. They made some fun of her as a woman scientist because, you know, she wasn't considered cutting edge. She was, in fact, extremely cutting edge. This was just misogyny that Crick and Watson, especially Watson, made fun of her. He was a very young scientist at that point and thought that she was not worthy of attention. What she did was, she, in a famous photograph, she was an X-ray crystallographer, and in a famous photograph called Photograph 51, she photographed the double helix. It's the first time its shape appeared anywhere. And it happened that she decided she would, you know, she knew that it was a huge discovery, but she decided to very slowly develop more photographs and then gradually introduce it into the discourse of the day. She had 2 visitors in her lab at that time. Happened to be Crick and Watson. And the quote from Watson was, "The stupid woman doesn't even know what she has." And in fact, that was bullshit. She had really, you know, first discovered DNA, and they, you know, it's not that they stole it, but they used that her image of the double helix, which they hadn't been able to figure out before. They used that to build their biological model of DNA. She died before tragically, of cancer, before the Nobel Prize was given to Crick, Watson, and one other guy, Maurice something. And she, you know, they don't give the Nobel Prize posthumously. I think they've just changed that, actually. But she wouldn't have been, in any case, included. So she's mentioned. Rosalind F. is mentioned here. I think that's all you really need to know. There's reference to the bang, which is a reference to the Big Bang, which is what? I'm sorry, I'm like teaching class here, sorry. You all know what the Big Bang is. Microscope. Fire thinks fire is the epigraph from Alice Fulton. Under a light microscope, a leaf is a leaf. Under the transmission electron microscope's eye that my daughter's eye refines, a leaf is a landscape subatomic. Particle choirs of light alter sight. Electromagnetic lens held to a blink. Here in a world determined by its own alienation from death. I remember not randomly how they used to joke that female smarts leaped scatterbrained. I see her, a child, dyeing a rose from our garden deep blue. I knew the world would always open a hidden path for her. Rosalind F. first saw the double helix as photograph 51. The interlopers took more than a cue from her slow gathering lightning. She was gone before this world recognized how she'd first charted the cathedral. Stars slow by entropy, by exclusion in her gaze. Now my daughter scopes coal, fly welter, airborne dust, ancient pine cone, each nano-narrative. Her alphabet begins as minerals, fossil lint, then shaggy bacteria, wilder virus, half skeptical, all the way back to the bang. Fire thinks fire, I repeat, a charm against mutating origins, but what do I know of these rippling souls of elements stripped to atomic ash on this ash planet, this animate dust? To see in this light you must be fearless, so I see only this, my blue rose, my wonder. Thank you.
Would be happy to take some questions.
Oh, don't all come at once. Come on. Anybody's got it?
Oh, here's one.
Okay. Sure, I'll stand up so you can hear me better. I won't get near that mic. Whatever it is. You don't even, you're right, you don't even need the mic. Yes.
What was your experience like in Paris and how did you grow as a writer? Well,
in Paris? You know, I don't know if I grew as a writer, but in terms, here's something. I read a lot. There's a reference to de Beauvoir, there's a reference to, another poems have references to Camus and other writers that I read. But also, I believe writers need a lot of life experience. It happens that in the PhD program I founded, that Claire mentioned at USC, we have our students, our graduate students are eager to publish. And that's a good thing. But it can also be it seems to me, a a possible obstacle against what writers need. And I, again, believe that that is life experience. So that time in Paris, for me, was an experience of learning, thinking I was learning the language pretty well. I was sort of fluent at one point. Reading and trying to read in French and trying to translate. I was at the University of Paris briefly. I also traveled a lot from Paris. Felt like my home in many ways. They always say you either love the English or the French, and I felt more home in Paris, even though I didn't know the language, than London. And so between travel and reading and just soaking in the extraordinary atmosphere of Paris, I mean, I would sound like a tourist guide if I mentioned all the places I hung out at and loved, but I was just walking when I got into Paris, into Hair. As I said, I was walking in the theater district in Paris, and happened upon this audition site. Are you going to Paris?
No, I actually live there as well. And I think that it definitely inspired a lot of my writing right now. And I think that I resonate with when you say that it's like the living experience. So
Yes.
I noticed that like my growth wasn't there. It's like now after and like reflecting
Yes,
on it.
that's
and
so true.
And the life experience was, I just wanted to hear it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. What arrondissement did you live in?
The 17th.
17th, that's really nice. I went back to Paris several times, of course, but I don't think anything, of course, Paris is always, you can't ever go wrong going there, but I think I learned the most that first, life experience that we're talking, in that first experience that we're talking about. It's wonderful to have been there, good for you. Anybody else have a question? Yes.
Just curious.
I know. Everybody's
What role
Stare.
does that, you talk a lot about mortality, like existential questions.
Death, you
What role does, yeah, death. What role does spirituality play for you throughout your poems?
What role does spirituality play? I assume you don't mean that in terms of religion or religious.
No, just like your own.
Well, that's an enormity in a way. I mean, it's one of those things that would be capital S, spirituality in the abstract. I think what we call spirituality, or I would like to think we translated poetry into another word, which is a sense of awe in poetry, a sense of wonder. John Keats, whose poetry some of you may know, in fact, Claire made reference to this in another conversation we had, and it's a wonderful statement he made that he believed that poets and others are here in a veil of soul-making, he called it, by which he meant we're here to learn, and he called it a school. We're here in our existence, our lives, our life experience is a school. Totally apart from this school, your college or education, you are learning to become the best soul that you can be. And your soul deepens with that experience. So I think that is the notion. John Keats' idea of the veil of or the valley of soul making is really what I believe to be true. There's a quote in the poem that I read. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. The one about Daphne after, about the young woman being raped. Where there's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, who was the famous, the inventor of the term Stoic. He was a Stoic poet and thinker, which meant that he, not the way we, perhaps not quite the way we think of it now as being, if you're stoical, you're resistant in a way to any trauma. He thought of it as being sort of, detached in almost a Buddhist sense. But there's a quote from him that is, the soul is dyed with the D-Y-E-D, with the color of its thoughts, which is wonderful, I think. The soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts. And I'm going to say, I don't want to sound like, a preacher or something saying your soul's going to be black, or, somebody telling you you're going to hell because your soul will be darkened by your evil deeds. But rather, that the color of your thinking, the depth of your thinking, will illuminate your soul in the colors of radiance. So that's a kind of broad answer, but that's as close as I can get. Anybody else? Yes?
You read one of your poems about your mother passing away and also about your husband's ashes. How do you write about pain, things that have been painful for you?
Well, I guess like that, I try to find a way. It's very hard, that's a very good question. It's very hard to write about two things. well, many things, but two things in particular that we all experience, love and death. We all experience love. We either are loved and we give love, and we all will experience death. But these things are extremely hard to write about. And I'm thinking of pain as attendant in both experiences, but they're extremely hard to write about. Why do you think? Because they're so enormous, you know, they're so huge, and at the same time, they're so common. They're so unknown, and yet they're so common. So we end up being sentimental about love and death. What do I mean by sentimental? I mean, you know, you send somebody a little card that says, I love you, yes, puppy, and puppies and kittens on it, and it's, you know, that's not quite it. And then death we think of in sort of, you know, cartoonish ways too sometimes. The Grim Reaper, or, you know, just the idea of, you know, Halloweenish kind of idea. Because we don't know how. It's very hard to write something that's really honest about love and death and pain, as you say. And so for me, I turn to poetry because there are great examples in poetry. Almost all poetry is about love and death and pain. Also joy. You know, and other, to some degree, abstractions, but all of, wow. There's an example of pain to someone who's trying to speak. Anyway, I think that if you read poetry, do you read poetry? You can't help but come across, you know, from the beginning, from the first poetic writings, that way of expressing the inexpressible, really. Because when you're in pain, can you describe it? It's very hard, isn't it? The most common things are the hardest to describe. Any other questions? Yes?
When you're like stuck on what to write about, or like you can't think of you can't think of what to write about, where do you draw your inspiration from? Like, how do you get past that like writer's block?
They call it writer's block. I keep saying, and I should never do this because I'll be stricken with it as soon as I say this publicly, I keep saying I don't believe in writer's block. Because for me, I've always been really busy, and I've always felt like I'm fighting to find time to write. You know, I'm working against everything that's going on in my life. You know, I'm a professor, I'm a mom, I've been a wife, and I have many friends, and I'm this and that, and I try, you know, I'm always busy. And so I trick myself, I believe, in some ways into writing in media res, which is Latin for in the middle of things. So I'll find myself writing at a stop sign when my car, I live in Los Angeles, so this can be problematic. Even writing in traffic, you're stopped a lot on the freeway, whatever. But, you know, I'll write on the backs of envelopes, I'll write in little pieces of paper, you know, in transit kind of. But I believe it probably is a trick to keep myself writing, and then I'll use those little notes and I'll hopefully build them into either prose, a story, or a poem, or whatever. I do have friends who have suffered, you know, legitimately from writer's block, and they just say it's like the end, like you can't get past it, it's this huge obstacle. I honestly feel that you have to find a way to trick yourself. You know, I mean, even if you're not that busy, if you just write a bunch of stuff, you know, you just write whatever. Some people would give themselves a word number, like you have to write, or a page, you have to write 3 pages every day, or you have to write 500 words, or 1,000 words. And that also works. Even if it's just garbage at the end and you don't like it and you throw it away, that's okay. We all, as writers, we learn by revising. I'm a total believer in revision. I'm sure that your teachers here would agree. It's not the original inspiration, it's the revision. And that to me is also exciting. It's like being a sculptor. You've got this mass of clay or marble, and you get to start, you see something in there and you start shaping it. You know, and you see the image emerging of what you want to say. That's revision. And it's actually very rewarding. So all I can say is from my own experience, it's, you know, it's that thinking in media res and tricking myself. Are you a writer?
Yeah, I'm in a poetry workshop for, it's my senior workshop, so sometimes it's like, I want to write, but I don't know how to like formulate my words on the page or something.
Do you have assignments given to you, or do you?
Yeah, so in my class I have to do like 2 poems a week.
Oh.
And like I
That's a
write
lot.
more than that, yeah. But I write more than that sometimes as well.
I shouldn't say that.
And
Whoops. Woo. But that is good. I mean, you write whatever, the poem comes to you, you know, even if it seems impossible. I'm sorry, you were saying something else.
I was just gonna say, like, sometimes like I want to write something but I don't know how to put it on the page. So I just wanted to like know like how you begin to start writing on the page.
I mentioned taking, you know, just writing down words, but also form is really helpful. You must know, obviously, if you're seeing your workshop in poetry, forms. The forms, you know, I read the Ghazal, that's a form. That's, again, I keep using this word, but it's another trick to get yourself to write. If I said to you, which I often say to my students, I'm sure you know this, this assignment, you write a sonnet, but you don't necessarily even call it a sonnet. You say, I'll say, give me 14 lines, roughly 10 syllables per line. You know, about whatever you want. 14 lines, 10 syllables per line. What will you have at the end of that? Unrhymed iambic pentameter, which is called blank verse. Because in English we speak with a certain syllabic emphasis. We speak naturally. It happens in 10 syllable, roughly 10 syllable units, and roughly a kind of iambic, that is to say, become, you know, that kind of accented rhythm. So if you give yourself, you're stuck and you give yourself the assignment of writing a sonnet, it doesn't have to rhyme. It can rhyme if you want, which is even more of a challenge, obviously. But if you just write the unrhymed 10 syllables per line, 14 lines, you're going to have a poem, no matter what, and it's going to be not bad at all, I guarantee you. Write to me and tell me, or email me if it turns out bad. If you decide to rhyme, you have a whole cornucopia of choices in terms of the sonnet. You can write a Shakespearean sonnet. You can write a Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. And the third is Spenserian sonnet. And these are rhyming forms. But listen to this. This is Shakespeare's. You've heard this before, I bet, because this sonnet has become very popular. It's even turned up in movies and stuff. Sonnet 116. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. No, it's an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is not shaken. It's a star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown though his height be taken. Love is not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out until the edge of doom. If this be false and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. Thank you. That's a Shakespearean sonnet. That is 14 lines, and it follows a pattern that you probably already know, a rhyme scheme that ends with the GG, what we call a heroic couplet. His conclusion, what is he saying? I know what love is, by God. It isn't giving up on people. It isn't letting people go or, you know, altering with every little brief whim. No, you're in for the long game. And if it ain't true, folks, he says actually, if this is false, or error, and upon me proved, I never writ nor knew. In your face, Shakespeare. I never wrote a line and I never loved. But, you know, that's what the sonnet does. It's a powerful form. It's an armored form. Check it out. But try the unrhymed first, the 14 lines and the 10 syllables. I guarantee you'll have a good poem. But email me for sure. Anybody else have a question? Sorry to...
Maybe one more.
Yes, yes.
I just want to ask if, like, do you write poetry for yourself or for others?
You know, that's a very good question. People often say, oh, I write for everybody in the world, you know. Like, how many people do you think read poetry in the world? Actually, it's getting, you know, as how we define poetry is broadening. It's getting, the audience is getting broader and broader itself, you know, because there are other forms of poetry, rap and all the rest of it. Many forms of, you know, music actually are rhyming. We also point to Bob Dylan and stuff like that. So then you realize it's not just writing necessarily for yourself, but I do believe you start out writing for yourself because you have to. It's almost like, I'm doing this because it's almost like you have a little, the mind moves in two directions at once in your imagination. You have to love what you're writing, you have to identify with it, at the same time as you have to step back and think, is this any good? So you almost have to become your own audience, you know what I'm saying? You divide in two. And then you publish if you wish to reach more people. That's a really good question. Or that was it. Right?
I think that was it, yeah.
I know